Hey guys, how's it going? Nick is here as always, and today I want to talk about factories. There was this thing when I was starting, and I'm sure that a lot of people that are starting right now, you guys have kind of, perhaps, maybe, I don't know. I know I did. This imaginary, I guess, kind of stereotype or, an outlook on factories. Like you've done your product research, you've gone on Alibaba, you now have kind of like the specifications. So you looked at the reviews, you know what you want to improve, you know what kind of product you want to launch. And so you go on Alibaba and bam, there you are, you check, make sure that the factory has been vetted by a third-party company, make sure that they're golden, whatever. You search your product and then you start going through factories one by one. And I'm gonna tell you a story about how I spent December looking for a product's factories and how I narrowed it down and my whole process of doing it. And then I will tell you what happened in January when I came to China to actually visit my top three, which ended up being top two, manufacturers that I narrowed down and the comparisons between the two. Unfortunately, I do lack the video to show you of the actual factories. I have a few photos here and there, but I'm gonna tell you a story, and I think a story will suffice enough. I began my search by just typing in certain keywords, and I went kind of above. So instead of just, without giving too much away, instead of typing like a specific thing, for example, like an umbrella holder, or umbrella, I went up a level where I typed textiles. So for example, instead of typing like plastic cup, so for example, typing in plastic workout cup, I went plastics factory. So I went one level above. And that's kind of how I've been able to first expand the search and then slowly re-narrow it down. I came up with about 15 factories. And I came up with a Excel sheet that, if any of you are interested, I would share it in my description down below. And it's basically, step by step of what you should be looking. So like the name of the factory, the name of the contact person, have they been contacted? Yes. Have they replied? Yes or no? How long did it take them to reply? And all these details. So what I was looking for is, how fast do they reply? How good is their English? How good are they at answering my questions? One thing that you might notice, especially on Alibaba when you message them, is that you'll ask, let's say, even if you structure your questions really well, like 1, 2, 3, they'll usually just answer, the questions that most work in their favor. They'll answer like one of them or two of them, and they'll leave one that maybe they don't want to answer. And so in China, when dealing with Chinese factories, there is this almost a thing where, I don't know how to describe it, but it's basically like, if you don't ask, they're not gonna go out and explicitly tell you. So that's why you have to be very thorough in terms of your search for the factories, and the questions that you ask them. It's really like a very detailed interview, and I don't have all the questions, but I will try to kind of bring up some generalities that you can derive your own questions from. So I narrowed it down. Next step was basically, I already had a product in mind that I wanted to make, and I sent them samples. Then I got, and I also sent product photos ahead of time, just basically trying to get them, to start the conversation and see if they can make it. So once I got a yay, like yes, they can make it, I asked for a quote. And then once I received the yes, we can make it, I got a quote. And I started basically, it's all about kind of keeping the conversation going. So I had questions like, can you do branded logos? What kind of other customers do you work with? You just want to basically keep asking them questions and keep noting it all down and vetting it out, because you don't know when you're going to uncover, quote unquote, like a black swan, what's important to them and how they operate. Also, you want to ask a lot of questions, because if you intend to visit a factory or you intend to hire a third-party service to visit the factory for you, you want to have a detailed list of everything that they said to you, so that when you go or when the third-party person goes, you basically pass that information to them. They said that they have 200 workers. They said that this is how many square meters the factory is. This is how much percentage of space they said that they allocate to developing the specific product. This is how many customers they said that they work with. When you go, or when your hired gun, so to speak, goes, they'll be able to cross-reference this and see whether it's been an exaggeration, just straight up lie, which happens a lot. Not the lying part, but the exaggeration part, because they do want your business. So, for example, a little thing that they do is, for example, if they work very closely with another factory, another workshop close by, and they could be a sales office, they will say that this is our factory, but then they'll backpedal if you call them out on it, which I don't recommend doing necessarily, because they take the guanxi, the face, very personally. So you don't want to call them out like you lied. You just want to say the situation is not as it is. It's weird, but I hope I'm making sense here. You want to get all the detailed information out. I'll probably make a separate video on just, and link it later on exactly what you want to ask, what kind of questions to ask, because I know that personally it's been very difficult for me to come up with questions. And thankfully, I have Rico by my side, who I have an interview in terms of moving to China, and Rico actually taught me a lot of these things. So I started narrowing it down with the samples and everything. I asked, are you a trading company or are you a factory? Of course, they're going to tell you they're a factory, but evidence a lot of times will suggest otherwise. The difference between trading company and a factory is trading company, they basically have very close relationships with the factories. The factory is like the owner of that factory specifically, where you come in and you talk to them. I know that trading companies get a lot of flack because they will probably put like a margin on top of what the factory will charge so that they make money. They're kind of like a sales office. But a lot of times, or I guess sometimes, it's not a bad thing, because if the trading company speaks very good English, they understand what you need in terms of quality control, in terms of maybe lower MOQ or negotiation power. You can't just go to a factory and that doesn't speak any English, like a factory boss or a factory manager. They don't speak English and you can't communicate. They have their own ways. Think of it as like a cultural buffer where they understand your culture and your needs, they understand their culture and their needs, and they kind of merge you together. So not all the time is it bad. But for my intents and purposes, I was trying to avoid trading companies. I was trying to work directly with factories. So I narrowed it down. I got the pricing. There were 3 factories that came out on top that I really liked the pricing. They were all up north because a lot of the textiles are made up north. In the south, it's more technology, and it tends to be a little bit more expensive in terms of Guangzhou and in terms of Shenzhen. The 2 factories were up north. One of them was in Shenzhen, which I was wondering, why is the price so low in the Shenzhen factory, which later on, once I got here, and thank God, this was disclosed to me before I got on the road and actually started going visiting. The Shenzhen factory said that, hey, actually, instead of having this low price, we're actually going to charge you almost like 40% higher to a price that I would believe is kind of like overcharging a bit, right? So they raised their price by 40%. Right away I was just like, there's no way. I mean, you provided, first of all, you already provided samples for me. You said, I looked at the samples, I'm like, this is great. They're like, this is the price that we're going to charge you. And then last minute they're like, oh, by the way, we rethought this. And you'll notice that a lot when you're working with factories on Alibaba. That's why I think I personally learned, and Rico always advises as well, to don't really get stuck on one factory. Always have backups of backups. Always have your top 3, top 4. You never want to get stuck with just being too overly invested into one factory. So I got back. The Shenzhen factory fell out, so I had 2 other factories left. So we'll start with number 1. Let's call this North Factory number 1. What was I told that it was going to be? I was told, their price, by the way, was the lowest. I was told that, hey, we cannot make samples for you because one of the machines for stitching is broken. I said, that's fair. Maybe I'll come by, maybe you'll have some sort of samples of similar products, and then once the machine is fixed, you can actually make an actual sample before Chinese New Year, because this was all happening in January. They're like, yep, sure, no problem, come on by. So what else was I told? I was told that they have one big factory with 200 people near this northern city. I was told that they had a warehouse where they process all the material, all the raw textiles. And then they basically send it out to this factory, which is all in the vicinity. They make it there, and then they do quality inspection control. They have like these 3-step quality inspection, blah, blah, blah. Okay, no problem. So I arrived there. It's very cold. I was very much underdressed for January weather. We go first to their sales office. Now, from the get-go, their sales office hosts about 9 to 10 seats. Instead, they had about 3 people working, which January is a very busy month because it's right before Chinese New Year. So December, January, usually they'll be flooded with like those last minute, orders that they have to pump out. That didn't happen. Instead, one of the further desks, it was like 1, 2, 3, 4, kind of like 4 together. There was just one girl working, and it was just full of all these different products. One of the best ways to tell whether you're working with a trading company or a factory is to look at their product lineup. For example, you can look at a lot of these cups, for example, and let's say, as an example, you see about 100 cups, right? Different styles, different colors, whatever. And you might think, oh, they're making cups, and it makes sense. So, this is a factory. Not necessarily. If these are all different, for example, you have one like this, you have one made of glass, different materials, different colors, different structural engineering of the cup, different shapes, different sizes, so to speak. Like that, every single one of those takes molds. Usually a factory will have about 10, depending on the size, but like, a smaller to medium sized factory will have maybe a dozen products. And even those will have very few variations in terms of just color, because for every new variation they have to create a separate mold. So unless the customer is going to pay for that, they're not going to do it. And usually factories have about 10 to 20 like very hardcore loyal customers that they work with, and they produce the same product over and over. If you're seeing a lineup of like 100 products and they're all different, that's a trading company. A lot of times you're gonna run into a factory that's also a trading company. It's like so they will make the core lineup of their products, but also they'll reach out to other factory and work with other factories to complete the lineup, so like add extras. It's nuanced, it's very nuanced, and it's only when you start visiting, you start seeing the showrooms and getting the feel for the place. That's when I think you really start to realize what you're working with. So I get to this place. They have a whole pile of product. It's similar, it's in the same niche, but it's all very different. There's like rubber, some is cotton, some is plastic, some is latex. I saw like cotton and other things blend. I know I'm being so vague about this. I'm sorry, guys. I'm just, as Amazon goes, like, I'm not necessarily trying to talk about a specific product. I really hope in the future I get to a level where I'm comfortable, where I can just, hey, here's a specific product case study, blah, 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 blah. And I really want to do that. But right now, I'm just not in a position right now, I don't feel like, where I can just fully, boom, disclose everything. But yeah, so they had all these different textiles. I'm like, okay, that's, and I'm writing in my journal. I started writing things down. Looking at my journal notes, I'm going to try to refer to these here and there, because throughout the whole visit I was taking pretty detailed notes. You never really know when you're gonna need them again and come back to them. Thank God I did. So the whole thing kind of began where we started running into trouble is, I saw the sales office, they looked at the samples that I brought with me, even though I sent them the samples already. We did some measurements. They're like, okay, we can do this. Some other guy came. He's like, okay, let's get in the car. So we got in the car, we started driving, and they said the factory is about 2 hours away. So I'm just in the car and I'm just making small talk, chatting with them. The number one thing that I tried to establish, or I guess the first thing that I tried to establish, was the whole process. Just kind of like, okay, tell me again from the beginning to the end, how do you guys get your textiles, your raw material? Where does it go? Where do you store it? Do you do any kind of treatment to it? Where do you send it? How does it get made? By whom? When? How long does it take? Where do you ship it after? Do you have a warehouse? So like trying to get the full kind of, supply chain to finished product until they ship it out, FOB, whichever port. So this is where we run into a problem, because at first I was told that, we actually manufacture, or we receive our material at this warehouse, then it gets treated at the warehouse, and that's where the machine is, and the machine is broken, but it's at the warehouse. So I'm like, so I'll be able to see the broken machine? She's like, yes, no problem, you know, you can inspect it, but like, we're gonna get a new machine after Chinese New Year, that's when we'll give you the samples. I'm like, okay, no problem. Then, you know, they told me that after it's in the warehouse, we send it to this factory that we're going to now. That's where it gets created, that's where it gets made, the material gets cut, and then we send it back to the warehouse, and then from the warehouse, we ship it out. I'm like, okay, that's three, kind of like a 1, 2, 3 point step system. Sounds pretty good. Eventually they started changing the story a little bit, where it's like, well, we actually get the raw materials made around the warehouse, and near the warehouse there's a big factory that we work with, and the factory that we're going to is actually not the big factory, it's one of our many workshops. And I was a little bit lost, and you know, I thought to myself, okay, you know what, let's just leave this for now, let's see it. So we arrive at the first factory. Here's what I saw. It was literally a 1 floor, maybe 2 room. In each room there was about 5 to 10 workstations, and these like older ladies, you know, working away, a couple of kids running around, which is completely normal. That's not that I had the problem with, but I was expecting, after my factory visits back in November, I was expecting like an actual genuine factory where you walk in, there's processes, there's a front desk, there's maybe a showroom, workers lounge, so to speak, or like workers area where they drop their stuff off, they check in, punch cards, you know, like a factory that you would imagine a factory. No, this was more of like living quarters in the back, and just these like workstation machines that, you know, they assemble everything by hand. Half the stations were full, half the stations were empty. There was like a kettle with some fire, that probably I can include the picture of that, just like a kettle with some like coals that I almost stepped into. Like, it looked pretty hazardous, number one. Number two, it was tiny. It was not a factory of 200 people, so I kind of addressed that right away. I'm like, so is this the factory of 200 people? You know, the girl that was my contact, right? She was just like, oh, no, it's not. We actually, like, it's at the warehouse, whatever. Near the warehouse, we have the big factory. I'm like, okay. So I took a bunch of pictures, kind of looked around, took my notes. Yeah, just basically like, there's definitely not enough people. I'm like, this is not the factory. So let's go to the factory. And I'm like, I have to see the warehouse, because apparently they didn't want to show it to me. Long story short, another hour-and-a-half drive. We got to the warehouse that they told me about. The warehouse actually seemed pretty legit. They had all the raw materials, you know, shelved away. They were pretty well labeled. They actually had a place where they, like right next door, where they were actually, you know, like manufacturing the raw material and like the textiles, but it was like a very small operation. So another thing that kind of put me, not on edge, but kind of made me question everything, was that everywhere that we arrived, there was kind of like a contact person that came out and greeted us, but they were like older men or an older woman, and they would be the ones talking to workers and saying things to workers, whereas like the people that were escorting me, the owner of the company and the girl who speaks English, who was my contact, as they were courting me around, basically it's like that was kind of like the factory owner, that was, or the workshop owner. You know, I never got the feeling that the people that I've actually spoken to, the owner of the company and the girl that spoke English with me, I never got the feeling like they were the owners of that place. It felt like they were just a trading company, that they had connections with all these little workshops and warehouses, and they kind of pieced it all together, and they were like the contact person with the foreigner. We went to this warehouse, and then I asked, you know, where's this broken machine, that the one thing that stands between making me samples? She's like, oh, it's actually back at the workshop that we were just at. And I was like, what? Wait a minute. Rewind. So I took out my phone, I pulled out the photos, I took photos of every single corner, I went through photos. Where is it? Where is the machine? She said, oh, it's actually been taken away from that workshop to be taken somewhere to get replaced. I'm sorry, and they always blame it on English. Like, they're good at conversation, they're good at talking to you in conversation, but then, you know, once you start asking them really difficult questions, and they're kind of like side looking at their boss, you know, trying not to say anything wrong, and just like, yeah, it's actually like different. It's actually not the way that I told you, or, you know, it changed. Like, things just like change magically. So after that point, I was very much like, a lot of red flags went up in my head. After that, we went to another workshop, very similar, just kind of like if you think about it, like a two-story house that had some machinery in it. That was like the cutting room. I don't know, like assembly room, I guess. Then we went to another workshop that was the same as the first one, and they were telling me how, based on demand, they own all these workshops, and based on demand, they go to these workshops and they order, whatever it is. I'm like, what's your QC? What's your quality control? They said, oh, we have these like 3 points of QC. I saw none of it. There was like, didn't look like it was inspection. I asked them for their QC docs, which usually, if a factory claims to have quality control, they should have procedure written out. Even if it's in Chinese, you could still get it and translate it using, like for example, I use Rico's employees to translate all the Chinese, documents or any kind of emails that I get. So that shouldn't be a problem. And if they fail to provide that, they don't have it. That's as simple as that. If they don't have, they're like, oh yeah, we have quality control, but it's a verbal quality. That's not how it works. You either have a system or you don't have it. That's it. Long story short, without boring you guys too much, like that's what ended up happening. So on paper, let's revise that. On paper, in December, when I was living in Philippines and I was assessing factories, on paper, they were the lowest price. They had good communication, good English, very responsive. They were up north, which made sense for the lower price. They sent me pictures of factory. It wasn't the factory or workshops that I saw, but they sent me a picture of factory, which later they claimed, oh, this is one of the factories that we own all the way out in the west. It's not actually one of these. These are like local workshops that we work with, but we have a big factory in the west that produces different kind of goods. I'm like, well, why did you send it to me then? Like, if it's relevant, you get a little frustrated with these things, but the number one advice I would say, and this is what Rico told me as well, number one advice when you're in person, even if you're over email, but like when you come to visit them in person, do not lose your cool. Just note it down, get mad at your hotel room later on. Do not let that show or seep through, because this will, if it's already bad, it'll just get worse. You stand to gain nothing by losing your cool in front of them. So just be like, okay, understand, and just write it down. Write down in your notes, sleep on it, wake up, see how you feel the next day, and then go over your notes with a sober mind. That's exactly what I did, and it was very helpful. But by that point, basically, there was a lot of things said. We spent a whole day driving around to these workshops. As I was leaving, I was getting on a plane. Basically the contact person said, oh, I'm so sorry for my English. And then later on, she ended up sending me a very long, detailed WeChat message, which, by the way, that was another thing that I missed, real quick aside, is that once you start talking to them via email, get on WeChat. First of all, get WeChat and then get on WeChat with the contact person. It's something that's familiar to them. It's something that they're very used to doing. And it's gonna be like the 80-20, where it's like such minimal effort, but it will mean a lot to them, because psychologically, all Chinese people are just always on WeChat. That is like their number one communications tool. Email is secondary, if not tertiary. Like, they're not used to doing the whole email thing. They just do quick WeChat. They do voice. If you could speak Mandarin, that would be amazing. But they love to do voice messaging. If not, they'll translate it in whatever and they'll put it into WeChat. So get WeChat, talk to them on WeChat. So later on, she sent me a message on WeChat apologizing. I feel like, I didn't communicate correctly to you, but, at that point, I already kind of got the idea. And then later on, there were some follow-ups where she said, okay, so because I feel so bad about this workshop situation, I didn't really know what was going on. My boss, whatever, she's the one who put it all together. I actually went out of my way to find another factory for you out in the West, which a day later changed to, actually, this factory in the West actually has another factory that's closer to Shanghai, and we actually want to use this factory. The price, of course, will be the same for you. Let us make you some samples from this factory. So I'm like, so hold on. So what happened to those workshops that I visited? Like, what was the point of me coming in the first place? So even if they could give me the best price in the world, I don't think I would work with them, just because so many red flags have already been raised that there is just like no way that I can trust this person, this factory, this company. There was just like no integrity behind it, and I felt like there was always like a corner to cut, and always, kind of like a mask after mask, like an onion of masks, and you're just peeling away, and You just never get to the core of things, how they really are. If you're in the Amazon business or any kind of manufacturing physical product business like myself, you're in it for the long haul. So that means that your number one key relationship will be with your factory and with your producer. Like, you want to have a good relationship with the boss of the factory. You want to have a good relationship with the contact people that that speak English. So if you don't have that, you don't really have anything. It'll always start off sweet, good price, good product, but after second, third reorder, it'll just start going downhill. They'll start raising prices on you, which happened with one of my factories that I worked with in the past. Despite how much quantity you order, despite how you expand your product line and you give them more and more business, they just keep raising prices, and that's just unacceptable. So you want to make sure that the people you're working are good. The business will take care of itself later on. So moving on to my second factory. Once again, I was expecting a factory. I spoke to the contact woman. She said, this is like a 16-year-old factory or a 16-year-old company that have been operating. Our factory has 100, 150 people. She picked me up from the train station. I started kind of doing a little bit of quizzing of her as well, just kind of reaffirming the information that I asked before, asking similar questions. Everything seemed to be kind of coming back the same. We got to the factory. Once again, this was not the factory. And this kind of set me on edge because of my previous experience. I already started thinking oh man, is this going to be another one of those? So it was just, it was bigger. So it was like a workshop, but it was probably 4 or 5 of these workshops put together, one main courtyard and one story, building. So we went into the sales office. There was about 3, 4 salespeople working there, which is what space they had. I went into their showroom, and in the showroom they had, just one type of product, but just these different variations of it. And I asked her, she was very upfront. She said, we're a factory, so we produce these products, but all these other ones, we actually get from factories that we work with. So to expand our product, I'm like, makes sense, that's cool. So I'm like, tell me about your factory. She's like, it's all the way out west. The reason why we can do such a good price is because the Chinese government subsidizes that factory specifically, everything, I said, I want to visit it. She said, it's quite far. I said, I don't care, I'm going. So we started talking about basically the points of delivery. So almost everything but the price, because I feel like the price always comes last. So it's the quantity, what we're looking at, let me get to know your factory. What kind of workers do you work with? Where's your material come from? Your supply chain, which the supply chain was no problem. It was just a step by step. Everything makes sense. From where they get their raw material to where they process it, to where they cut everything, to where they assemble everything, the timing of the delivery, FOB which port exactly, do they have a freight forwarder that they work with, all the good stuff. Which, like I said, I'll go over in the next video because this is already taking too long, this whole story. So we sat down, we spoke, and then we went out for lunch. Later on, I said I'd like to meet the boss because he wasn't in the office previously, but I still had about an hour and a half before my train. So she took me back to the, I guess they were acting as a warehouse, kind of receiving raw material, processing, and then sending it off to this super Western factory for full assembly and then bringing it back. So I got to meet with the boss. He spoke very good English, probably better than his salesperson. And me and him, when you sit down and you talk to a person, within the first couple of minutes, you just form your own opinion of them and what kind of vibe they have. I got a really good vibe from this guy. Let's call him Mr. L. So me and Mr. L, we just vibed. We talked about his business, his future projections, how he was thinking of moving to Southeast Asia and moving his operations out of China slowly because, in my opinion as well, the Chinese government will only raise the environmental tax, the labor costs, or I guess the minimum wage of employees. So that's what they were moving out west. He told me that, well, actually the factory in the west, it's not our factory, but it's a close friend of mine that I've worked with for a long time. He owns that factory and we work together. And I'm like, thank you for being honest. That was a breath of fresh air. I don't care if it's yours or not. I just care what kind of relationship you have and can you deliver the product at the price? And is it quality product? So he just said that up front. I was very happy. I looked at the contact girl, she was kind of a little but you can't really blame them too much because, it's their job on the line. They have to sell, they have to get you in. So they're going to try and make it seem as grandiose as possible. the best way to cut through the bullshit is to go to the boss, the head honcho, and talk to him. If he speaks English, that's a huge win. Then you can actually talk like an entrepreneur to an entrepreneur, like actually understand each other. He told me about all these other materials that they're working with, gave me a lot of cool ideas. So bottom line, like he shone a lot of light on the situation. He told me exactly how the process works. Their material was awesome, and it was a special kind of secret sauce that they had in terms of how they treat their material and where they get it. Their outlook on the future of the company and how they were planning to move to Southeast Asia, that was great. I really enjoyed that. Their pricing was good. So basically bottom line is like I left feeling like I got the full story, and I felt pretty good coming back, like recapping, discussing everything with Rico. He gave me some, okay, yeah, those are some good points. Okay, I would look out for this. Moving forward, you want to sign a sales agreement. So that's what I'm doing. In March, literally in a couple of weeks, I am going back to that factory. We're going to spend a couple of days just me and the boss getting to know each other a little bit more, signing the sales agreement, putting in the final big order, and then getting that shipped out to all my Amazons. So that was basically the story of how I perceived the factories and how you may perceive factories versus what it actually is. In the future, I know that Rico and his employees, they do quite a bit of factory visits. I actually want to get a lot of footage of these factories and actually show you, because what you perceive, what you might think is a factory, is actually could be just like a warehouse. A lot of times it could even be just like a garage where they just have like these couple of machines, and like you got grandpa and uncle, working side by side, pumping out these like small little widgets or fidget spinners or whatever. So it's not what you might think. That's why I think spending, kind of like to recap everything, spending my time in China and actually going through these processes of, visiting factories, because like I don't have to do that. I could pay Rico and his company can do that, but I feel like it's such an essential part of doing business, and especially when you're just like in your 20s or in your 30s, you still got, blood pumping through your veins, like, even like 40s, man. Like I'm looking at Gary Vee now, and he's just talking about, like he's 40, but he's never felt younger before. So like, who knows? I've never been at that age stage, so, but like regardless of what age you are, really, like it really pays, like pay the money, come down here and see this for yourself, because it's really cool. You start to form your own opinion, and you start to see how business is done here, and you start to learn, because that, I promise you, inevitably will evolve or turn into how you communicate online or through WeChat, or in the future any kind of businesses that you do, just visiting these factories. And like China is the best place to visit factories because there's so many of them. It's industry, right? It's the country of industry. Make sure that you probe, you ask all the questions, make sure you ask as many questions as possible, get all the information, and then when you visit, double check it, double reference it, follow your gut feeling. I think I've been an advocate of that since day one. That's how I picked my Amazon product. The numbers were right, but I had top 3 products, and at the end I just went with I'm like, I just know this will work. Same thing applies here. If it doesn't feel right, just don't even go there. No matter how much they try to seduce you with pricing or lunch or drinks at night, like whatever, just stick to your gut feeling. If it doesn't feel right, don't do it. Don't go down that route. I hope that you guys learned something from the story. I know it ran a little bit long. I'll try to edit it and compress it as much as possible. But yeah, I hope you learned something. If you like this video, you got something out of it, give it a thumbs up. I would love to hear your feedback, any kind of questions you have down in the comments below. Of course, subscribe as always. I'm putting out a lot of this China manufacturing business, Amazon topic footage now that I'm here. And I hope to see you in the next video. Cheers.